Whole burnt offering. God called Moses and spoke to him from the tent of meeting. Speak to the people of Israel. Tell them, when anyone presents an offering to God, present an animal from either the herd or the flock. If the offering is a whole burnt offering from the herd, present a male without a defect at the entrance of the tent of meeting, that it may be accepted by God. Lay your hand on the head of the whole burnt offering, so that it may be accepted on your behalf to make atonement for you. Slaughter the bull in God's presence. Aaron's sons, the priests, will make an offering of the blood by splashing it against all sides of the altar that stands at the entrance of the tent of meeting. Next, skin the whole burnt offering and cut it up. Aaron's sons, the priests, will prepare a fire on the altar, carefully laying out the wood, and then arrange the body parts, including the head and the suet, on the wood prepared for the fire on the altar. Scrub the entrails and legs clean. The priest will burn it on the altar, a whole burnt offering, a fire gift, a pleasing fragrance to God. If the whole burnt offering comes from the flock, whether sheep or goat, present a male without defect. Slaughter it on the north side of the altar in God's presence. The sons of Aaron, the priest, will throw the blood against all sides of the altar. Cut it up, and the priest will arrange the pieces, including the head and the suet, on the wood prepared for the burning on the altar. Scrub the entrails and legs clean. The priest will offer it all, burning it on the altar, a whole burnt offering, a fire gift, a pleasing fragrance to God. If a bird is presented to God for the whole burnt offering, it can be either a dove or a pigeon. The priest will bring it to the altar, wring off its head, and burn it on the altar. My God. But he will first drain the blood on the side of the altar, remove the gizzard and its contents, and throw them on the east side of the altar where the ashes are piled. Then rip it open by its wings, but leave it in one piece and burn it on the altar on the wood prepared for the fire. A whole burnt offering, a fire gift, a pleasing fragrance to God. Leviticus chapter 2, grain offering. When you present a grain offering to God, use fine flour, pour oil on it, put incense on it, and bring it to Aaron's sons, the priests. One of them will take a handful of the fine flour and oil with all the incense and burn it on the altar for a memorial, a fire gift, a pleasing fragrance to God. The rest of the grain offering is for Aaron and his sons, a most holy part of the fire gifts to God. When you present a grain offering of oven-baked loaves, use fine flour mixed with oil but no yeast, or present wafers made without yeast and spread with oil. If you bring a grain offering cooked on a griddle, use fine flour mixed with oil but without yeast. Crumble it and pour oil on it. It's a grain offering. If you bring a grain offering deep fried in a pan, make it of fine flour with oil. Bring the grain offering you make from these ingredients and present it to the priest. He will bring it to the altar. Break off a memorial piece from the grain offering and burn it on the altar, a fire gift, a pleasing fragrance to God. The rest of the grain offering is for Aaron and his sons, a most holy part of the gifts to God. All the grain offerings that you present to God must be made without yeast. You must never burn any yeast or honey as a fire gift to God. You may offer them to God as an offering of first fruits, but not on the altar as a pleasing fragrance. Season every presentation of your grain offering with salt. Don't leave the salt of the covenant with your God out of your grain offerings. Present all your offerings with salt. If you present a grain offering of first fruits to God, bring crushed heads of the new grain roasted. Put oil and incense on it. It's a grain offering. The priest will burn some of the mixed grain and oil with all the incense as a memorial, a fire gift to God. Leviticus chapter 3, peace offering. If your offering is a peace offering and you present an animal from the herd, either male or female, it must be an animal without any defect. Lay your hand on the head of your offering and slaughter it at the entrance of the tent of meeting. Aaron's sons, the priests, will throw the blood on all sides of the altar as a fire gift to God from the peace offering. Present all the fat that covers or is connected to the entrails, the 2 kidneys and the fat around them at the loins, and the lobe of the liver that is removed along with the kidneys. Aaron and his sons will burn it on the altar along with the whole burnt offering that is on the wood prepared for the fire, a fire gift, a pleasing fragrance to God. If your peace offering to God comes from the flock, bring a male or female without defect. If you offer a lamb, offer it to God. Lay your hand on the head of your offering and slaughter it at the tent of meeting. The sons of Aaron will throw its blood on all sides of the altar as a fire gift to God from the peace offering. Present its fat, the entire fat tail cut off close to the backbone, all the fat on and connected to the entrails, the 2 kidneys and the fat around them on the loins, and the lobe of the liver which is removed along with the kidneys. The priest will burn it on the altar, a meal, a fire gift to God. If the offering is a goat, bring it into the presence of God. Lay your hand on its head and slaughter it in front of the tent of meeting. Aaron's sons will throw the blood on all sides of the altar As a fire gift to God, present the fat that covers and is connected to the entrails, the 2 kidneys and the fat which is around them on the loins, and the lobe of the liver which is removed along with the kidneys. The priest will burn them on the altar, a meal, a fire gift, a pleasing fragrance. All the fat belongs to God. This is the fixed rule down through the generations. Wherever you happen to live, don't eat the fat, don't eat the blood, none of it. Leviticus chapter 4, absolution offering. God spoke to Moses, tell the Israelites, when a person sins unintentionally by straying from any of God's commands, breaking what must not be broken, if it's the anointed priest who sins and so brings the guilt on the people, he is to bring a bull without defect to God as an absolution offering for the sin he has committed. Have him bring the bull to the entrance of the tent meeting in the presence of God. Lay his hand on the bull's head and slaughter the bull before God. He is then to take some of the bull's blood, bring it into the tent of meeting, dip his finger in the blood, and sprinkle some of it 7 times before God, before the curtain of the sanctuary. He is to smear some of the blood on the horns of the altar of fragrant incense before God, which is in the tent of meeting. He is to pour the rest of the bull's blood out at the base of the altar of whole burnt offering, at the entrance of the tent of meeting. He is to remove all the fat from the bull of absolution offering, the fat which covers and is connected to the entrails, the 2 kidneys, and the fat that is around them at the loins, and the lobe of the liver which he takes out along with the kidneys. The same procedure as when the fat is removed from the bull of the peace offering. Finally, he is to burn all this on the altar of burnt offering. Everything else, the bull's hide, meat, head, legs, organs, and guts, he is to take outside the camp to a clean place where the ashes are dumped and is to burn it on a wood fire. If the whole congregation sins unintentionally by straying from one of the commandments of God that must not be broken, they become guilty, even though no one was aware of it. When they do become aware of the sin they've committed, the congregation must bring a bull as an absolution offering and present it at the tent of meeting. The elders of the congregation will lay their hands on the bull's head in the presence of God, and one of them will slaughter it before God. The anointed priest will then bring some of the blood into the tent of meeting, dip his finger in the blood, and sprinkle some of it 7 times before God in the front of the curtain. He will smear some of the blood on the horns of the altar, which is before God, in the tent of meeting, and pour out the rest of it at the base of the altar of whole burnt offering at the entrance of the tent of meeting. He will remove all the fat and burn it on the altar. He will follow the same procedure with this bull as with the bull of the absolution offering. The priest makes atonement for them, and they are forgiven. They will then take the bull outside the camp and burn it just as they burned the first bull. It's the absolution offering for the congregation. When a ruler sins unintentionally by straying from one of his commands of his God, which must not be broken, he is guilty. When he becomes aware of the sin he has committed, he must bring a goat for his offering, a male without any defect. Lay his hand on the head of the goat and slaughter it in the place where they slaughter the whole burnt offering in the presence of God. It's an absolution offering. The priest will then take some of the blood of the absolution offering with his finger, smear it on the horns of the altar of whole burnt offering, and pour the rest at the base of the altar. He will burn all its fat on the altar, the same as with the fat of the peace offering. The priest makes atonement for him on account of his sins, and he is forgiven. When an ordinary member of the congregation sins unintentionally, straying from one of the commandments of God, which must not be broken, he is guilty. When he is made aware of his sin, he shall bring a goat, a female without any defect, and offer it for his sin, lay his hand on the head of the absolution offering, and slaughter it at the place of the whole burnt offering. The priest will take some of its blood with his fingers, smear it on the horns of the altar of whole burnt offering, and pour the rest at the base of the altar. Finally, he'll take out all the fat, the same as with the peace offerings, and burn it on the altar for a pleasing fragrance to God. In this way, the priest makes atonement for him, and he's forgiven. If he brings a lamb for an absolution offering, he shall present a female without any defect. Lay his hand on the head of the absolution offering and slaughter it at the same place they slaughter the whole burnt offering. The priest will take some of the blood of the absolution offering with his finger, smear it on the horns of the altar of burnt offering, and pour the rest at the base of the altar. He shall remove all the fat, the same as for the lamb of the peace offering. Finally, the priest will burn it on the altar on top of the gifts to God. In this way, the priest makes atonement for him on account of his sin, and he's forgiven. Leviticus chapter 5. If you sin by not stepping up and offering yourself as a witness to something you've heard or seen in cases of wrongdoing, you'll be held responsible. Or if you touch anything ritually unclean, like the carcass of an unclean animal, wild or domestic, or a dead reptile, and you aren't aware of it at the time, but you're contaminated and you're guilty. Or if you touch human uncleanness, any sort of ritually contaminating uncleanness, and you're not aware of it at the time, but later you realize it, and you're guilty. Or if you impulsively swear to do something, whether good or bad, some rash oath that just pops out and you aren't aware of what you've done at the time, but later you come to realize it and you're guilty in any of these cases. When you are guilty, immediately confess the sin that you've committed and bring as your penalty to God for the sin you have committed a female lamb or goat from the flock of an absolution offering. In this way, the priest will make atonement for your sin. If you can't afford a lamb, bring as your penalty to God for the sin you've committed 2 doves or 2 pigeons, one for the absolution offering and the other for the whole burnt offering. Bring them to the priest, who will first offer the one for the absolution offering. He will wring its neck but not sever it. Splash some of the blood of the absolution offering against the altar and squeeze the rest of it out at the base. It's an absolution offering. He'll then take the second bird and offer it as a whole burnt offering, following the procedure step by step. In this way, the priest will make atonement for your sin and you're forgiven. If you cannot afford the 2 doves or pigeons, bring 2 quarts of fine flour for your absolution offering. Don't put oil or incense on it. It's an absolution offering. Bring it to the priest. He'll take a handful from it as a memorial and burn it on the altar with the gifts for God. It's an absolution offering. The priest will make atonement for you and any of these sins you've committed, and you're forgiven. The rest of the offering belongs to the priest, the same as with the grain offering. Compensation offering. God spoke to Moses, when a person betrays his trust and unknowingly sins by straying against any of the holy things of God, he is to bring as his penalty to God a ram without any defect from the flock. The value of the ram was assessed in shekels, according to the sanctuary shekel, for a compensation offering. He is to make additional compensation for the sin he has committed against any holy thing by adding 20% to the ram and giving it to the priest. Thus the priest will make atonement for him with the ram of the compensation offering, and he's forgiven. If anyone sins by breaking any of the commandments of God, which must not be broken, but without being aware of it at the time, the moment he does realize his guilt, he is held responsible. He is to bring to the priest a ram without any defect, assessed at the value of the compensation offering. Thus the priest will make atonement for him for his error that he was unaware of, and he's forgiven. It is a compensation offering. He was surely guilty before God. Leviticus chapter 6. God spoke to Moses, when anyone sins by betraying trust with God, by deceiving his neighbor regarding something entrusted to him, or by robbing or cheating or threatening him, or if he has found something lost and lies about it, and swears falsely regarding any of these sins that people commonly commit, when he sins and is found guilty, he must return what he stole or extorted. Restore what was entrusted to him. Return the lost thing he found or anything else about which he swore falsely. He must make full compensation, add 20% to it, and hand it over to the owner on the same day he brings his compensation offering. He must present to God as his compensation offering a ram without any defect from the flock, assessed at the value of a compensation offering. Thus the priest will make atonement for him before God, and he's forgiven of any of the things that one does that bring guilt. Further instructions. God spoke to Moses, command Aaron and his sons, tell them, these are the instructions for the whole burnt offering. Leave the whole burnt offering on the altar hearth through the night until morning, with the fire kept burning on the altar. Then dress in your linen clothes with linen underwear next to your body. Remove the ashes remaining from the whole burnt offering and place them beside the altar. Then change clothes and carry the ashes outside the camp to a clean place. Meanwhile, keep the fire on the altar burning. It must not go out. Replenish the wood for the fire every morning. Arrange the whole burnt offering on it and burn the fat of the peace offering on top of it. Keep the fire burning on the altar continuously. It must not go out. These are the instructions for the grain offering. Aaron's sons are to present it to God in front of the altar. The priest takes a handful of fine flour of the grain offering with its oil and all its incense and burns this as a memorial on the altar, a pleasing fragrance to God. Aaron and his sons eat the rest of it. It is unraised bread, and so eaten in a holy place, in the courtyard of the tent of meeting. They must not bake it with yeast. I've designated it as their share of the gifts presented to me. It is very holy, like the absolution offering and the compensation offering. Any male descendant among Aaron's sons may eat it. This is a fixed rule regarding God's gifts, stretching down the generations. Anyone who touches these offerings must be holy. God spoke to Moses, this is the offering which Aaron and his sons each are to present to God on the day he is anointed. 2 quarts of fine flour as a regular grain offering, half in the morning and half in the evening. Prepare it with oil on the griddle. Bring it well mixed and then present it crumbled in pieces as a pleasing fragrance to God. Aaron's son, who is anointed to succeed him, offers it to God. This is a fixed rule. The whole thing is burned. Every grain offering of a priest is burned completely. It must not be eaten. God spoke to Moses, tell Aaron and his sons, these are the instructions for the absolution offering. Slaughter the absolution offering in the place where the whole burnt offering is slaughtered before God. The offering is most holy. The priest in charge eats it in the holy place, the courtyard of the tent of meeting. Anyone who touches any of the meat must be holy. A garment that gets blood spattered on it must be washed in a holy place. Break the clay pot in which the meat was cooked. If it was cooked in a bronze pot, scour it and rinse it with water. Any male among the priestly families may eat it. It is most holy. But any absolution offering whose blood is brought to the tent of meeting to make atonement in the sanctuary must not be eaten. It has to be burned. Leviticus, chapter 7. These are the instructions for the compensation offering. It is most holy. Slaughter the compensation offering in the same place that the whole burnt offering is slaughtered. Splash its blood against all sides of the altar. Offer up the fat tail, the fat covering the entrails, the 2 kidneys, and the fat encasing them at the loins, and the lobe of the liver that is removed with the kidneys. The priest burns them on the altar as a gift to God. It is a compensation offering. Any male from among the priest's families may eat it, but it must be eaten in a holy place. It is most holy. The compensation offering is the same as the absolution offering. The same rule applies to both. The offering belongs to the priest who makes atonement with it. The priest who presents a whole burnt offering for someone gets to hide for himself. Every grain offering baked in an oven or prepared in a pan or in a griddle belongs to the priest who presents it. It's his. Every grain offering, whether dry or mixed with oil, equally belongs to all the sons of Aaron. These are the instructions for the peace offering, which is presented to God. If you bring it to offer thanksgiving, then along with the thanksgiving offering, present unraised loaves of bread mixed with oil, unraised wafers spread with oil, and cakes of fine flour, well kneaded and mixed with oil. Along with the peace offering of thanksgiving, present loaves of yeast, bread as an offering. Bring one of each kind as an offering, a contribution offering to God. It goes to the priest who throws the blood of the peace offering. Eat the meat from the peace offering of thanksgiving the same day it is offered. Don't leave any of it overnight. If the offering is a votive offering or free will offering, it may be eaten the same day it is sacrificed. Whatever is left over on the next day may also be eaten. But any meat from the sacrifice that is left to the third day must be burned up. If any meat from the peace offering is eaten on the third day, the person who has brought it will not be accepted. It won't benefit him a bit. It has become defiled meat. And whoever eats it must take responsibility for his iniquity. Don't eat meat that has touched anything ritually unclean. Burn it up. Any other meat can be eaten by those who are ritually clean. But if you're not ritually clean and eat meat from the peace offering for God, you will be excluded from the congregation. And if you touch anything ritually unclean, whether human or animal uncleanness or an obscene object, and go ahead and eat from the peace offering to God, you'll be excluded from the congregation. God spoke to Moses, speak to the people of Israel, tell them, don't eat any fat of the cattle, of sheep, or goats. The fat of an animal found dead or torn by wild animals can be put to some other purpose, but you may not eat of it. If you eat fat from an animal from which a gift has been presented to God, you'll be excluded from the congregation. And don't eat blood, whether birds or animals, no matter where you end up living. If you eat blood, you'll be excluded from the congregation. God spoke to Moses, speak to the people of Israel. Tell them when you present a peace offering to God, bring some of your peace offering as a special sacrifice to God, a gift to God in your own hands. Bring the fat with the breast and then wave the breast before God as a wave offering. The priest will burn the fat on the altar. Aaron and his sons get the breast. Give the right thigh from your peace offering as a contribution offering to the priest. Give a portion of the right thigh to the son of Aaron, who offers the blood and fat at the peace offerings as his portion. From the peace offerings of Israel, I'm giving the breast of the wave offering and the thigh of the contribution offering to Aaron, the priest, and his sons. This is their fixed compensation from the people of Israel. From the day they are presented to serve as priests to God, Aaron and his sons can expect to receive these allotments from the gifts of God. This is what God commanded the people of Israel to give the priests from the day of their anointing. This is the fixed rule down through the generations. These are the instructions of the whole burnt offering, the grain offering, the absolution offering, the compensation offering, the ordination offering, and the peace offering which God gave Moses at Mount Sinai on the day he commanded the people of Israel to present their offerings to God in the wilderness of Sinai. Leviticus chapter 8, ordination of priests. God spoke to Moses. He said, take Aaron with him, his sons, the garments, the anointing oil, the bull for the absolution offering, the 2 rams, and the basket of unraised bread. Gather the entire congregation at the entrance of the tent of meeting. Moses did just as God commanded him, and the congregation gathered at the entrance of the tent of meeting. Moses addressed the congregation. This is what God has commanded to be done. Moses brought Aaron and his sons forward and washed them with water. He put the tunic on Aaron and tied it around him with a sash. Then he put the robe on him and placed the ephod on him. He fastened the ephod with a woven belt, making it snug. He put the breastpiece on him and put the Urim and Thummim in the pouch of the breastpiece. He placed the turban on his head with the gold plate fixed to the front of it, the holy crown, just as God had commanded Moses. Then Moses took the anointing oil and anointed the dwelling and everything that was in it, consecrating them. He sprinkled some of the oil on the altar 7 times, anointing the altar and all its utensils, the wash basins and its stand, consecrating them. He poured some of the anointing oil on Aaron's head, anointing him and thus consecrating him. Moses brought Aaron's sons forward and put tunics on them, belted them with sashes, and put caps on them, just as God had commanded Moses. Moses brought out the bull for the absolution offering. Aaron and his sons placed their hands on its head. Moses slaughtered the bull and purified the altar by smearing the blood on each of the horns of the altar with his finger. He poured out the rest of the blood at the base of the altar. He consecrated it so atonement could be made on it. Moses took all the fat on the entrails and the lobe of the liver and the 2 kidneys with their fat and burned it all on the altar. The bull with its hide and meat and guts he burned outside the camp, just as God had commanded Moses. Moses presented the ram for the whole burnt offering. Aaron and his sons laid their hands on the head of the ram. Moses slaughtered it and splashed the blood against all sides of the altar. He cut the ram into pieces and then burned the head, the pieces, and the fat. He washed the entrails and the legs with water and then burned the whole ram on the altar. It was a whole burnt offering, a pleasing fragrance, a gift to God, just as God had commanded Moses. Moses then presented the second ram, the ram for the ordination offering. Aaron and his sons laid their hands on the ram's head. Moses slaughtered it and smeared some of its blood on the lobe of Aaron's right ear, on the thumb of his right hand, and on the big toe of his right foot. Then Aaron's sons were brought forward, and Moses smeared some of the blood on the lobes of their right ears, on the thumbs of their right hands, and on the big toes of their right feet. Moses threw the remaining blood against each side of the altar. He took the fat tail, all the fat that was on the entrails, the lobe of the liver, the 2 kidneys with their fat, and the right thigh. From the basket of unraised bread that was in the presence of God, he took 1 loaf of the unraised bread made with oil and 1 wafer. He placed these on the fat portions and the right thigh. He put all this in the hands of Aaron and his sons, who waved them before God as a wave offering. Then Moses took it all back from their hands and burned them on the altar on top of the whole burnt offering. These were the ordination offerings, a pleasing fragrance to God, a gift to God. Then Moses took the breast and raised it up as a wave offering before God. It was Moses' portion from the ordination offering ram, just as God had commanded Moses. Moses took some of the anointing oil and some of the blood from the altar and sprinkled Aaron and his garments and his sons and their garments, consecrating Aaron and his garments and his sons and their garments. Moses spoke to Aaron and his sons, "Boil the meat at the entrance of the tent of meeting and eat it there with the bread from the basket of ordination, just as I commanded, saying, Aaron and his sons are to eat it. Burn up the leftovers from the meat and bread. Don't leave through the entrance of the tent of meeting for 7 days. That will complete your ordination. Your ordination will last 7 days. God commanded what has been done this day in order to make atonement for you. Stay at the entrance of the tent of meeting day and night for 7 days. Be sure to do what God requires, lest you die. This is what I have been commanded." Aaron and his sons did everything that God had commanded by Moses. Leviticus 9, the priests go to work. On the 8th day, Moses called in Aaron and his sons and the leaders of Israel. He spoke to Aaron, "Take a bull calf for your absolution offering and a ram for your whole burnt offering, both without defect, and offer them to God. Then tell the people of Israel, take a male goat for the absolution offering and a calf and a lamb, both yearlings without defect, for a whole burnt offering, and a bull and a ram for a peace offering, to be sacrificed before God with a grain offering mixed with oil, because God will appear to you today." Then brought the things that Moses had ordered to the tent of meeting. The whole congregation came near and stood before God. Moses said, "This is what God commanded you to do, so the shining glory of God will appear to you." Moses instructed Aaron, "Approach the altar and sacrifice your absolution offering and your whole burnt offering. Make atonement for yourself and for the people. Sacrifice the offering that is for the people and make atonement for them, just as God commanded." Aaron approached the altar and slaughtered the calf as an absolution offering for himself. Aaron's sons brought the blood to him. He dipped his finger in the blood and smeared some of it on the horns of the altar. He poured out the rest of the blood at the base of the altar. He burned the fat, the kidneys, and the lobe of the liver with an absolution offering on the altar, just as God had commanded Moses. He burned the meat and the skin outside the camp. Then he slaughtered the whole burnt offering. Aaron's sons handed him the blood, and he threw it against each side of the altar. They handed him the pieces and the head, and he burned these on the altar. He washed the entrails and the legs and burned them on top of the whole burnt offering on the altar. Next, Aaron presented the offerings of the people. He took the male goat, the absolution offering for the people, slaughtered it, and offered it as an absolution offering, just as he did with the first offering. He presented the whole burnt offering following the same procedures. He presented the grain offering by taking a handful of it and burning it on the altar, along with the morning whole burnt offering. He slaughtered the bull and the ram, the people's peace offerings. Aaron's sons handed him the blood, and he threw it against each side of the altar. The fat pieces from the bull and the ram, the fat tail and the fat that covers the kidney and the lobe of the liver. They laid on the breast, and Aaron burned it on the altar. Aaron waved the breast and the right thigh before God as a wave offering, just as God commanded. Aaron lifted his hands over the people and blessed them, having completed the rituals of the absolution offering, the whole burnt offering, and the peace offering. He came down from the altar. Moses and Aaron entered the tent of meeting. When they came out, they blessed the people, and the glory of God appeared to all the people. Fire blazed out from God and consumed the whole burnt offering and the fat pieces on the altar. When all the people saw it happen, they cheered loudly and then fell down, bowing in reverence. Leviticus chapter 10, Nadab and Abihu. That same day, Nadab and Abihu, Aaron's sons, took their censers, put hot coals and incense in them, and offered strange fire to God, something God had not commanded. Fire blazed out from God and consumed them. They died in God's presence. Moses said to Aaron, "This is what God meant when he said, 'To the one who comes near me, I will show myself holy. Before all the people, I will show my glory.'" Aaron was silent. Moses called for Mishael and Naphasan, sons of Uzziel, Aaron's uncle. He said, "Come, carry your dead cousins outside the camp away from the sanctuary." They came and carried them off outside the camp, just as Moses had directed. Moses then said to Aaron and his remaining sons, Eleazar and Ithamar, "No mourning rituals for you, unkempt hair, torn clothes, or you'll also die, and God will be angry with the whole congregation. Your relatives, all the people of Israel, in fact, will do the mourning over those God destroyed by fire. And don't leave the entrance to the tent of meeting lest you die, because God's anointing oil is on you." They did just as Moses said. God instructed Aaron, "When you enter the tent of meeting, don't drink wine or strong drink, neither you nor your sons, lest you die." This is a fixed rule down through the generations. Distinguish between the holy and the common, between the ritually clean and unclean. Teach the people of Israel all the decrees that God has spoken to them through Moses. Moses spoke to Aaron and his surviving sons, Eleazar and Ithamar. "Take the leftovers of the grain offering from the fire gifts for God and eat beside the altar that which has been prepared without yeast, for it is most holy. Eat it in the holy place, because it is your portion and the portion of your sons from the fire gifts to God. This is what God commanded me. Also, you and your sons and daughters are to eat the breast of the wave offering and the thigh of the contribution offering in the clean place. They are provided as your portion and the portion of your children from the peace offerings presented by the people of Israel. Bring the thigh of the contribution offering and the breast of the wave offering and the fat pieces of the fire gifts and lift them up as a wave offering. This will be the regular share for you and your children as ordered by God." When Moses looked into the matter of the goat of the absolution offering, he found that it had been burned up. He became angry with Eleazar and Ithamar, Aaron's remaining sons, and asked, "Why didn't you eat the absolution offering in the holy place, since it is most holy? The offering was given to you for taking away the guilt of the community by making atonement for them before God. Since his blood was not taken in the holy place, you should have eaten the goat in the sanctuary as I commanded." Aaron replied to Moses, "Look, they sacrificed their absolution offering and whole burnt offering before God today. You see what has happened to me. I've lost 2 sons. Do you think God would have been pleased if I had gone ahead and eaten the absolution offering today?" When Moses heard this response, he accepted it. This is the word of the Lord.